Our speaker today is Hessam Abedini, a PhD candidate in comparative literature at the University of Oregon. His research interests include Iranian Greek epic traditions, phenomenological hermeneutics and translation theory, Byzantine Islamic textual transmission, Shahnameh manuscript traditions, and religion and aesthetics in world cinema. Hessam earned an MA in Modern and Contemporary Literature and Culture at the University of York in the UK in 2016, and a BA in English Language and Literature at Azad University in Tehran, Iran in 2014. He's the author of, I'm going to just read the English.
Yes, sure.
The Art of Absence in Samuel Beckett and Abbas Kiarostami, published by Nazar Art Publications in 2018. And he has been working on the first English translation of Shahnameh, Persian Alexander romance, by Abu Tahir Tarsusi. 10 of the 36 chapters have been drafted, and the full 2-volume manuscript is expected in 2029. So he's very busy. As a 2025-26 Oregon Humanities Center Fellow, Hessam has been working on a project titled When Three Magi Serve Homer, Asymmetric Hermeneutics and the Victorian Translation of Firdausi Shahnameh. He shares his work in progress with us today. Welcome, Hessam.
Okay, thank you. So thank you all for coming. I'm here today thanks to the Oregon Humanities Center Fellowship, which has given me time and space to focus on my second chapter in my dissertation. As Leah described, my dissertation is called When the Three Magi Serve Homer. That title comes from the 19th century French critic Charles-Augustin Sainte-Beuve, who described three great Eastern poets as magi bringing gifts to Homer, the Greek master. The metaphor was meant as praise, but it perfectly encodes the problem I'm studying and analyzing today, the assumption that Eastern literature exists to serve Western categories. So this is the Jones quotation. The spirit and invention of Homer have ever continued without a rival, for which reasons I'm far from pretending to assert that the poet of Persia is equal to that of Greece. But there is certainly a very great resemblance between the works of those extraordinary men. So in 1772, Sir William Jones proclaimed Firdausi as the Oriental Homer. He meant it as the highest compliment European literary culture could bestow. But notice the qualifier, I'm far from pretending to assert that the poet of Persia is equal to that of Greece. Firdausi resembles Homer without equaling him. The comparison that appeared to honor Firdausi actually inscribed his inferiority, and more damagingly made him comprehensible only through categories his own work neither knew nor tried to emulate. That comparison shaped how every subsequent English translator approached this work. Today, I want to show you what it costs, specifically what happens to the concept of far, or conditional divine glory, when it passes through the interpretive grid that comparison established. So what is Shahnameh? Shahnameh is the Book of Kings, 50,000 couplets, 2.5 times longer than the length of the Iliad and Odyssey combined in terms of syllables. It tells the story of Iran from the creation of the world to the Arab conquest in the 7th century AD. Mythological kings, legendary heroes, historical monarchs across nearly 4,000 years. So Firdausi spent nearly 30 years composing it. Shahnameh is the national epic of Iran. 300 million people celebrate Nowruz, the Persian New Year, which Firdausi says was established by the king Jamshid, legendary king Jamshid. So this is the book I brought from the library the Shahnameh of Shah Tahmasp. You could circulate it around if you would like. The book, as some of you might know, the book that you're handling is worth probably $3,000 at least. This book, it's okay. So this is the cosmological difference made visible. I want to show you what Shahnameh looks like, not as a text, but also as a visual tradition. Last summer, with support from Global Oregon, I spent some time at the Metropolitan Museum examining 6 out of 78 folios from this Shah Tahmasp Shahnameh, the most spectacular illustrated manuscript in the world. It's made in the Safavid era of Iran in the 14th or 15th century. Look at the differences. European painting uses linear perspective, one vanishing point, one viewer position. You stand in one spot and look in one direction. Persian miniature painting has no vanishing point. The viewer sees everything at once from above and from the front simultaneously. The viewer is like God, seeing the whole scene, not trapped in one position. European painting uses chiaroscuro, light and shadow, make bodies solid and heavy. Persian painting has no shadow. Everything is bathed in clear, even illumination, as if lit from within. The world is luminous. European painting studies the anatomical body. Nudity is central. Persian painting shows idealized types, moon-faced, arched brows, dressed in exquisite textiles. The body is the vehicle for displaying cosmic order, not for displaying itself. This is not a difference in skill, it's a difference in cosmology. Two traditions that see the world differently, painted differently. So who is Firdausi, the writer? Firdausi was a Shia Muslim poet born around 940 CE. He worked from Middle Persian prose sources that preserved pre-Islamic Zoroastrian mythology, stories that were already over 1,000 years old when he versified them. His intellectual work included all three of traditions simultaneously. Avicenna, the greatest Islamic philosopher, was his exact contemporary. They may have lived in the same city. Neoplatonic philosophy, which teaches that reality emanates from a single divine source through successive levels of being, had become the dominant philosophical idiom. So when Firdausi composed Shahnameh, he was drawing on Zoroastrian mythology, Islamic theology, and Neoplatonic metaphysics all at once. These traditions don't compete in Shahnameh, but they coexist. And this coexistence is what Victorian translators could not perceive. So in the 19th century, three translators shaped how English readers encountered Persian literature. Jones proclaimed Firdausi the Oriental Homer, and then immediately said he was far from pretending the Persian poet equaled the Greek. Fitzgerald turned Omar Khayyam's Sufi mystical poetry into what became the most popular poem in the Victorian English-speaking world by stripping out everything Sufi about it and replacing it with biblical imagery. Arnold, and this is the case I examined most closely, compressed the 3-day combat between a father and son into a single dawn to dusk encounter, added 16 Homeric similes, imposed Aristotelian temporal unity, and produced what is still the most widely read English rendering of any episode from Shahnameh. Each believed he was honoring the original, each was replacing one literary universe with another. So my dissertation introduces a concept I call asymmetric hermeneutics. It names what happens when one culture interprets another culture under conditions of unequal power. The Victorian translators had rich categories for Greek epic. They had virtually no categories for understanding Persian epic on its own terms. Far, conditional divine glory. So the translation moved in one direction only. Greek categories were imposed onto Persian material, not maliciously, but structurally. Their classical education made certain substitutions feel like improvements rather than replacements. The translators weren't villains, they were structurally blind. That's what asymmetric hermeneutics names. The intersection of genuine interpretive limitation with the colonial power that authorized these limitations as universal standards. So Hebrew, Sanskrit, Persian, 3 languages encountered by Victorian Britain, 3 different fates. Hebrew terms survived translation. Amen, hallelujah, seraph, cherubim, they survived because Christian theology required it. The wrong rendering risks blasphemy. So translators preserved the foreign word and let English stretch to receive it. Sanskrit terms survived too: dharma, karma, moksha, atman. They survived because the British colonial government built scholarly infrastructure around them. Fort William College in Calcutta produced pandits and munshis. Their authority was institutional. Even when the British understood the words badly, they kept them in transliteration. Persian had neither protection. Iran was never formally colonized. Its literature was not sacred to the West. The British produced no Persian Fort William, so nothing compelled preservation. The result was not partial distortion, it was outright substitution. Far, the Persian word, became glory, bakht became fate, pahlavani or honar became valor or championship. The words did not survive in transliterated form. They were replaced by English equivalents already shaped by Greek precedent. This is what I mean by hermeneutical invisibility. Hebrew was sacred, Sanskrit was scholarly, Persian was neither. It suffered the most thorough domestication of all. So my dissertation has 3 chapters. Chapter 1 traces the genealogy of Victorian translation and shows how the Oriental Homer comparison distorted everything. Chapter 3 establishes what was substituted, the Greek categories that feel universal but aren't. Today I want to focus on Chapter 2, the chapter I'm writing this term with the support of this fellowship. Chapter 2 asks, what did those translators actually confront? What is the philosophical architecture of Shahnameh that Victorian translation eliminated? So what is far? What did translators actually confront when they opened Shahnameh? This answer centers on one word. So what is far? Gerardo Nioli, the Italian Iranologist, defines it as a magic force or power of luminous and fiery nature, etymologically linked to the Iranian word for sun. So far is the divine glory that makes a king legitimate, not power. You can't have power without far, not wealth, not armies. Think of it as a cosmic glow or solar nimbus. Visible, conditional, and revocable. The key word is conditional. This isn't charisma in Max Weber's sense. Far is either really there or really not there. It depends on whether the king maintains his relationship with the divine source. Far is a luminous radiance bestowed by God on righteous rulers and withdrawn from unrighteous ones. Think of it as a kind of cosmic glow. When a king possesses far, the Avestan sources tell us there is no cold wind, no hot wind, no old age, no death, no envy. The whole world flourishes. When far departs, and this is the crucial point, it departs visibly. In the Zamyad Yasht, the oldest Avestan source, it leaves in the shape of a falcon. In Shahnameh, when Jamshid loses it, the world literally turns dark. This is a metaphor. Within the poem's theology, far is an ontological reality, either present or absent, depending on the king's moral conduct. This conditionality is what makes far philosophically distinctive and what every English translation eliminates. So, every English translation of far fails, not because translators are incompetent, but because the concept belongs to three traditions simultaneously. A Zoroastrian sees Khavarna, conditional divine glory that departs in the form of a bird when the king sins. The Zamyad Yasht, composed perhaps 1,000 years before Firdausi, describes the glory leaving King Yima 3 times in falcon form, seeking worthier vessels. A Muslim hears something close to divine light or nur, the radiance God bestows on legitimate authority. The Quran says God is the light of the heavens and the earth. A Neoplatonist recognizes emanation of phase, light flowing from a transcendent source through successive levels of being. Sohrawardi, the 12th century philosopher, used exactly the Persian words far and kharra as technical terms in his Neoplatonic light ontology. Far is all three at once. The text sustains all three readings simultaneously. That's what makes it untranslatable, not poverty of meaning, but plenitude. It means too many things at once for any single English word to capture. Translated as glory, and you lose the conditionality. Translated as charisma, and you import Max Weber. Translated as fortune, and you suggest luck, where the Persians see divine justice. This is where I head off the overreading worry. Someone will wonder whether I'm projecting philosophical complexity onto a narrative poem. I'm not. Sohrawardi, the 12th century philosopher, did it first from inside the tradition. So who he was, Persian philosopher executed at Aleppo in 1191 for ideas the Orthodox found dangerous. He built a system called Illuminationism, a fusion of Greek Neoplatonism with Zoroastrian light symbolism. He named it after Khosrow, the philosophy of the Khosrows. When the 12th century philosopher names his tradition after a Shahnameh king, he's telling us the king is philosophy. 3 traditions converge in a single line. So we read this: whoever knows philosophy and perseveres in thanking and sanctifying the light of lights will be endowed with royal glory, kharre, and with luminous splendor, farre. 3 traditions converge here. Kharre and farre are Zoroastrian terms for divine glory. The light of lights is Neoplatonic. Sohrawardi's name for the first principle. Hikmat and thanking and sanctifying are Quranic. 3 traditions held together in one sentence, deliberately, and that is my whole chapter in miniature. Jamshid's fall on this reading is not the story of a king losing his throne, it's the story of a soul forgetting that its glory is borrowed. The gift mistaken for the giver. Khosrow, another king, I'm coming back in the next slides, Khosrow's disappearance into the mountains is the mirror image, a soul that never made the mistake leaving the world with the radiance intact. The king become types, way of living or falling to live in the light. This method has a name. Henri Corbin, French philosopher and theologian, calls this ta'wil, spiritual exegesis or esoteric reading, bringing a text back to its source. Not allegory or metaphor in the European sense. The outer story is real, the inner meaning is real, both at present at once. The Victorians had no concept of this. They worked at the level of plot. What they produced was accurate on the surface and wrong underneath. The illuminationist reading came from inside the tradition 150 years after the poem. This is the prelude. Firdausi tells you how to read his poem before any story begins. The prelude establishes that God is beyond comprehension. Mind and wisdom fail to penetrate beyond the elements. Him thou canst see not, thou thy sight thou strain, for thought itself a struggle to attain. To one above all name and place in vain, since mind and wisdom fail to penetrate beyond our elements, but operate on matters that the senses render plain. But then comes the paradox. Knowledge is declared the source of human strength. The faculty cannot reach God is nevertheless what sustains legitimate authority in the world below. This is where far becomes necessary. If God can't be known directly, the divine must manifest indirectly through luminous radiance resting on righteous kings. Far makes the transcendent visible without making it comprehensible. Dick Davis's Penguin translation omits this entire cosmological prelude. The reader encounters Far without the philosophical architecture that explains what Far is. So Jamshid, our first king that I'm going to analyze, reigns for 700 years. In that time, he teaches humanity everything we think of as civilization. Metal work, medicine, textiles, architecture, gemstones, perfumes. He divides society into its four orders: priests, warriors, farmers, artisans. He establishes Nowruz. This is celebrated today by 300 million people from Iran to Tajikistan. His throne is gem-studded and borne aloft by demons. He sits in the warner's phrase sunlight in mid-air. The Far shines from him so brightly the world flourishes. For 3 centuries nobody dies, no illness, no old age, demons served instead of threatening. So the royal grace shone brightly from the Shah. This is what Far at its fullest visible cosmic civilizing, the golden age Iranian tradition remembers. Then one speech undoes it all. Jamshid says, "The world is mine, I found its properties. The royal throne has seen no king like me. For I have decked the world with excellence and fashioned the earth according to my will. Who saith that there is any great king save myself? All hail me as the maker of the world." Every claim in it, it's actually, is accurate. Jamshid did teach humanity these things, that what makes it dangerous. Who saith that there is any great king save myself? An echo of the Islamic declaration of faith. The creature has claimed to be the creator. And immediately God's grace departed from him. The Far leaves, not as punishment imposed from outside, but as consequence. The light withdraws from a vessel that has stopped being transparent to it. Note that this is not a pride before a fall story in the Greek sense. It is a theological error. forgetting what you possess comes from God. The English word pride covers both and explains neither. So this is the second king, Kavus. He's a different kind of king. He's not evil, he's not even stupid exactly, he's reckless. This showpiece is when a demon whispers in his ear, "Your far is so great, why stay on earth? Fly to heaven." So Kavus has a throne built. He straps hungry eagles to the legs. He dangles meat above their heads and lances. The eagles fly upward, trying to reach the meat, carrying Kavus into the sky. And then long flew the eagles, but they stopped at last, like other slaves of greed. They sulked, exhausted. They drooped their sweating wings and brought the Shah his spears and thrown down from the clouds to earth, alighting in a forest near Amul. He crashes to the ground. But here's the philosophical interesting part. He doesn't lose the far. Jamshid, the first king, lost it permanently. Kavus keeps it. Why? 3 words: penitence and travail. He repents. He never claimed to be God. That was Jamshid's error. He claimed too much, heaven as his jurisdiction, but not everything. He exceeded his limits without denying that limits exist. And that distinction between forgetting the source and exceeding the limits is the difference between irrecoverable and recoverable transgression in Shahnameh's moral theology. And the third king is Khosrow, who is the best king in Shahnameh. At the summit of his power, having conquered the enemy and avenged his father, he does something no one expects. He abdicates. He walks into the mountains with 5 companions and tells them, the way before thee is the way to God. His instructions to his successor are telling, "My day hath passed, go thou maintain the usage of the royal throne, and in the world sow but the seed of good. Whenever thou hast any times of ease, boast not about thy treasures and thy crown. Know this, that when thy day of darkness cometh, the way before thee is the way of God." To God. His companions perish in the snow. Khosrow vanishes. Not dies, he vanishes. He passes beyond the world with the far intact. The Bundaheshn, the book of creation, written in late antiquity probably, lists him among the immortals who will return at the end of time. The third king completes the pattern. He possesses far fully and maintains it through continuous recognition that it comes from God, not from himself. So 3 kings, 3 relationships to far. Jamshid forgets the source and loses it permanently. Kavus exceeds the limits but repents. His penitence and travail preserve a connection. Jamshid's self-deification destroyed. Khosrow, the best king, recognizes the source and the summit of his power abdicates, walking into the mountains and vanishing with the far intact. Together they exhaust the logical possibilities of what a human being can do with participated divine radiance. This is a philosophical investigation conducted through narrative. And that is what English translation flattens into glory and pride before a fall. Edmund Warner and Arthur Warner, who translated Shahnameh from 1905 to 1925, which is the only complete verse translation of Shahnameh, translated far as grace or glory throughout. The translation reads beautifully, "The royal grace shone brightly from the Shah," which is lovely English, but look at everything the reader loses. The Zoroastrian conditionality, the Neoplatonic emanation, the Islamic theology of light. the Three King typology, the Preludes, entire philosophical architecture. The word grace reads fluently, and that fluency is the problem. I call this unconscious completion, the seamless integration of foreign material into domestic categories, performed so smoothly that no seam is visible.
So what was the name of that translator that you just mentioned?
The two brothers, Edmund Warner and Arthur Warner.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Dick Davis's Penguin translation, published in 2006, is the most widely read English Shahnameh. And Davis alone among English translators preserves far as an untranslated term. This is a genuine advance. But Davis renders much of the poem in prose, and this reflects a deeper conviction. In Epic and Sedition, Dick Davis argues that Shahnameh derives primarily from oral storytelling traditions, that Firdausi is essentially a teller of tales rather than a poet engaged in original philosophical composition. The consequence is significant. Davis preserves the untranslatable word while dissolving the poetic structure through which the poem does its cosmological and philosophical work. The verse form of Shahnameh is not ornamental, it's the medium through which Far's three theological dimensions are held in simultaneous suspension. Prose narration, however skillful, converts philosophical poetry into story. So, why Dick Davis thinks that Shahnameh comes from oral sources mainly? The oral tradition thesis itself exemplifies the problem. Olga M. Davidson, the wife of Gregory Nagy, applied the Parry-Lord oral formulaic framework to Shahnameh, a framework she developed in direct partnership with Gregory Nagy, whose work on Homeric oral poetics is the most authoritative treatment of Greek epic composition. This analytical instrument built for Homer has been applied to determine what Persian epic is, and has concluded unsurprisingly that Persian epic resembles Greek epic. The circle is methodological. A theory built for one tradition applied for another discovers the first tradition in the second. But Firdausi was a literate poet composing over 3 decades from written Middle Persian sources within one of the most literary cultures of the medieval world. To read Shahnameh through Homeric oral theory is to perform at the level of methodology the same substitution that Matthew Arnold performed at the level of poetic form, replacing Persian literary complexity with Greek structural assumptions and calling it the result of a discovery about the Persian text. Lawrence Venuti's The Translator's Invisibility is the most influential work in contemporary translation studies. His central argument, translation ethics, requires abandoning the ideal of fluent rendering that effaces its own mediation. The translator must become visible. He gives us domestication versus foreignization. My dissertation extends Venuti by identifying a case his framework does not theorize. Jones and Fitzgerald were not invisible translators. Jones was celebrated as Oriental Jones and Persian Jones across Europe. Fitzgerald's Rubaiyat sold over 2 million copies. His name was inseparable from the work. Arnold, strictly speaking, was not a translator at all. He adapted a Persian story through French intermediaries into original English verse. All 3 were celebrated, visible figures, yet their visibility coincided with the erasing Persian literary culture's autonomous presence. This invisibility was not the translators, it was the source cultures. What disappeared was the autonomous presence of the Persian tradition, its theology, its cosmology, its alternative ways of organizing the relationship between human action and divine order. I argue for what I call conscious incompletion, the willingness to mark where understanding fails rather than concealing the failure through fluency. A translation that preserves the term far in italics with a note explaining its theological range. A translator that lets the reader see where English fails, a translation honest about its own limits. The Warner's translation achieved unconscious completion, seamless fluency at the cost of everything foreign. Davis achieved partial conscious incompletion, preserving the word, but dissolving the form and context and gave it meaning. The remedy is not one or the other, but all three at once. Preserve the word, preserve the verse, preserve the philosophical architecture. This is the most quoted line from Shahnameh. 50,000 couplets in Shahnameh. Woe for Iran, for it is desolate, the lair of pards and lions. I thought its relevance for recent things. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
People can raise their hands with questions.
Okay.
We'll do it. John.
Yes.
Well, yes, I think that your last slide
Yes.
partially answered my question.
Mm-hmm.
Because earlier in your presentation, you had the Greek word kleos,
Yes.
which was fame in song.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we know that the Homeric epics were performed.
Mm-hmm.
They were not read and studied
Yes.
as philosophical documents.
Mm-hmm.
And I was unclear whether the Shahnameh
Mm-hmm.
was similar in that respect or different.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked from your last visual as if it was being performed.
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than studied or
Mm-hmm.
philosophically analyzed. And I think that that was my original confusion in studying the Homeric epics, because I thought they were full of unnecessary repetition.
Mm-hmm.
But I was told that's because they were performed rather than studied or analyzed or
Yes.
philosophically, shall we say, worked over.
Yes.
And I think also you raised the question of how do we translate the untranslatable?
Mm-hmm.
And the sort of all-purpose answer of these translators was, we translate it into idioms we can understand,
Mm-hmm.
but they are not necessarily what the original work was trying to convey.
Mm-hmm.
So then it becomes the eternal translator's question of how do we translate something which we don't understand into something we do understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, your presentation sort of highlighted that,
Mm-hmm.
but you can contradict me. But I will pose the original question, despite the visual, and that is the Shahnameh primarily considered a document to be studied and philosophically analyzed, or is it seen today by many people as a performance to be experienced?
both. I would say both because Homer was performing, I guess, nearly in the 6th, 7th BC. But Shahnameh was written in 1010 AD. And so there is a lot of, there's 1700 years gap. There's a lot of philosophical development taking place in this gap that made Shahnameh philosophically, what's the word? More developed. Not superior, but more developed. Okay? How can I... well, Homer was illiterate, but Firdausi was completely literate.
Okay.
So we call in epic, we call Homer the primary source, and Shahnameh the secondary source, because it's based on written materials. And he was taking and drawing his sources from his previous poems, from Middle Persian sources based. For example, there was exactly the same Shahnameh before Firdausi's Shahnameh called Shahnameh Abu Mansuri, Shahnameh of Abu Mansur, but it was completely in prose. So Firdausi took the source and versified it. So there's a gap, and even from the gap of Homer to Plato, a lot of things developed, and Plato developed it more, but in Homer there is less philosophical, there's no philosophy or theology in Homer. There is religion, but not theology. Theology starts with Hesiod, in my opinion. This is a controversy in Greek studies. Chris Eckerman should comment. He's the senior. But as far as I know, there's a controversy in saying whether theology existed in Homer. But in my opinion, there is only religion, not theological or philosophical development that comes with Hesiod rather than Homer. And the last slide that you saw was the House of Strength is called. It's Zurkhane in Persian, in which the wrestlers come and wrestle with each other. And this is performed by the Shahnameh, because most verses is about wrestling between heroes. He performs, called Morshed, he performs the poetry of Firdausi for the wrestlers, which is a very modern phenomenon. It's not ancient, this House of Strength.
So if I
Let's take some more questions.
Hessam, first off, what an absolute delight to hear your talk.
Thank you.
I really how it's structured, how you're presenting it, the philosophical stakes of what you're doing, and the intervention in translation. I was curious because in the story you're telling us, I love, that there's the Shahnameh and then the Greek portion, but there's also the Victorian translation ethics. And it's that I'm kind of interested in. Because on the one hand, I'm going to bracket Jones for a second, but for Fitzgerald and Arnold, there's an argument of domestication.
Yes.
I love the terms you're giving for surplus and untranslatables and what have you. But I was curious because alongside Fitzgerald and Arnold are sort of contemporaneous with it, a whole tradition of Orientalist studies deeply, deeply invested in foreignization. That is to say that, and I know more in the Arabic context, but like the Arab world is untranslatable, and therefore all categories for analysis of the Arab world must come from a study of, Arabic and Islamic texts. So I was curious, in light of the kind of literary dimension of Arnold and Fitzgerald, which works in the service of domestication, how you understand the Orientalist discourse, the scientific discourse that is, in a sense, invested in foreignization. And I recognize that Jones and Fitzgerald and Arnold can all be seen as strands of Orientalism.
Mhm.
But I guess then the question is, are there exceptions? So even in Said's Orientalism,
Mhm.
you know, there's the villains, I like your word of villainy, but, you know, and then there's Louis Massignon, who's the good Orientalist. So
Okay.
you've given us a category of three. Are there, within this tradition in the Victorian period, other figures who would not necessarily fit the model in the same way?
In the Victorian period, I don't think, because the structural condition was one way. From English translating Persian, there was no Persian editor in London editing the translations of Arnold, so it was one way. Because of structural limitation, hermeneutical limitation. And in the Victorian period, no, but in the modern period, Basil Bunting, he discovered Shahnameh. He was the friend. He's not very well liked in English studies because he was the best friend of Ezra Pound. And we know Ezra Pound was promoting fascist ideas at the time. So, but his poetry is amazing. So Basil Bunting, the friend of Ezra Pound, was in Genoa in 1932, discovered Shahnameh from the library in Italy, and applied for Guggenheim. But he was rejected to translate the whole Shahnameh. But he translated partially, and he went to Iran, married an Iranian woman, became a British spy in Iran, and then even named his children after two Persian Shahnameh figures. And he went back to England. He has partial translations, which is very genuine. Yeah, I like his translations. Yes, and even though Warner and Warner were Victorian, I like their translation as well because it's the only complete verse translation of Shahnameh. But sorry to keep it quickly. You mentioned Orientalism. My work, Asymmetric Hermeneutics, is between Gadamer and Said. Because neither Gadamer, Paul Ricoeur, Antoine Berman can explain this, nor Said. Something bit in between. Because Said names the ideology. Something I'm working on it is below ideology. For example, Said would consider as agents of epistemic violence, but I don't consider them as agents of epistemic violence. I consider them, they genuinely admired, some of them, Persian literature, but structural thinking and education came through Oxford, in which Matthew Arnold was teaching Greek, and through classics in general. They didn't know anything about Persian.
I had a very short, quick question.
And I think Chris.
Oh, and Chris.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you. My question was, you introduced far and you defined it as conditional divine glory.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious about your qualifier that you put the word conditional in your definition. And a little bit, and later in your talk, you referred to Zoroastrian conditionality.
Mm-hmm.
And I just realized I didn't know what you meant by conditionality in your talk. And I was wondering if you could sort of talk about how you're defining that.
Yes,
how
it's conditional because if a king, it's not forever, the far is not forever gift, eternal gift to you. It's conditional on proper function, which is called khishkari in Persian. If you do proper function, you don't lose far. But if you violate the proper function, like hubris, you lose it.
So it's something that can be taken away by God.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why it's conditional.
And why did you particularly link it up with Zoroastrianism also later?
Because far comes from Zoroastrian. Yes. Mhm.
Okay.
It's the source.
Thank you. That was a
Shahnameh ultimately comes from the Western sources. Mhm.
Thank you. Hessam.
Sure.
Oh, I was just wondering if you could say anything about the translation traditions into other languages besides English. Not necessarily that I'm asking you to like expound on
Yes.
these sort of philosophical questions. I was just interested because like we have this 800-year gap
Yes.
before it comes into English. How else is it circulating besides in Persian? Is it translated into Arabic? Is it translated into French? Like, what's the...
It was first translated into French before it was translated into English by Jules Moll, the German French translator, who even edited the Shahnameh and also translated. Edited the Persian because the text itself needs editing.
Yeah.
The Persian. So we have the Moscow edition of Shahnameh, the Jules Moll edition of Shahnameh, but nowadays those are very old-fashioned now because we have a recent edition by Jalal Khaled Motlaq, an Iranian scholar who worked on it for 30 years. Which is the best one. Sorry, what was your question?
Well, about the translation history.
Oh, yes. I know the French one, but I haven't worked with German, to be honest. Or Arabic, yes. Yeah. I have to work on it.
It was just a curiosity.
Yes. But then it was Jules Moll's edition that Charles Augustin Sambov wrote a review on that translation.
When is it translated into French? Is it 18th century also?
You mean the review by... Oh, yes, 18th century. And then Charles Augustin reviewed the work, and then Matthew Arnold just read the review and wrote the poem.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yes.
So just going back to the question first, and you were talking about that you appreciate the Davis translation, except that it's in prose.
Yes.
And then you said that there's a poetic form that actually carries the power of the poem. So tell us more about the verse form that the Shahnameh is in, and what do you think would be an appropriate verse form to use in English?
Well, I think the appropriate form to use in English is blank verse, because that's the most established epic English. Milton, Shakespeare, Tennyson all wrote in blank verse, unrhymed iambic pentameter, and the problem with prose, Dick Davis explained this in the preface of Shahnameh, the prose. He said that because it comes from oral sources and minstrels, I guess the prose goes better with the minstrel thing nowadays with contemporary culture. That was the reason. And the Persian original is in prosody called mutaqarib, which is impossible to produce in English because it goes long, long, short, long, long, short, long, long, short. Sorry. short, long, long, short, long, long. So it's impossible to produce this in English. So we have to work with what are the most established metrics in English epic, which is blank verse. But again, Victorian translators translated this into Pope, Alexander Pope style, like who translated Homer again on heroic couplets. Yes, which is very neoclassical.